Hello, hello. I'm here at an Electrify America DC fast charge station with a beautiful Mythos Black Volkswagen ID.4 doing the 0 to 100% DC fast charge test. We're going to record the whole session, break it down, analyze it, see how good at charging the ID.4 really is. But first, don't forget, click that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any upcoming content here on State of Charge.
Some of you may recall about 6 months ago, I did a 2% to 90% DC fast charge test on an ID.4, and it took 48 minutes to complete, and the vehicle took in 71 kilowatt hour. I wasn't happy with that because it was only 2 to 90%. I wanted to do a complete 0 to 100% DC fast charge session. So I got a hold of another ID.4, and we're doing it here today. I arrived at the Electrify America DC fast charge station with 1% state of charge. So I had to drive around the parking lot a little bit to make sure I get it down to 0 miles and 0 state of charge. But I did, and we plugged in and began the session. As soon as I plug in, the ID.4 immediately begins pulling 123 kilowatt, which is really what we love to see. And in only 4 minutes, it's up to 10% state of charge and charging at 128 kilowatt. Now, as the pack voltage increases, the charge rate creeps up to a peak of 131 kilowatt at the 30% state of charge point. That's when the ID.4 begins to slowly ramp down the charge rate. And it's still at a robust 116 kilowatt at the 40% state of charge point. I'm going to stop the video at this point because at 40%, the ID.4 has replenished 100 miles of driving range, but that's if you use the EPA range rating of 250 miles per charge as your barometer. I've done a 70 mile an hour highway range test with the ID.4 in which I was able to drive at 234 miles. I like to use my own personal range tests as the measuring stick for how many miles of range you have at what percentage state of charge the vehicle's at. So if you go by my range test, the vehicle would need to be at 43% state of charge in order to have 100 miles of driving range. And in that case, the ID.4 takes 2 more minutes and reaches the 43% state of charge point in only 17 minutes. It reaches 50% state of charge in 20 minutes. And at that point, the car's pulling 88 kilowatt.
So we have just reached 50% charged in 20 minutes, and that's charging from a dead zero. So the ID.4 can go from 0 to 50% charged in 20 minutes. Not bad at all.
It then takes 6 minutes to go from 50% state of charge to 60% state of charge, and is drawing 82 kilowatts at 60% state of charge. After 30 minutes of charging, the ID.4 is at 66% state of charge and has taken in 54 kilowatt hour of electricity. It then reaches 70% state of charge in 32 minutes, and then 75% in 36 minutes, and it reaches the milestone of 80% charged in a very respectable 40 minutes. I'm stopping the video at the 80% state of charge point because this is when it has recovered 200 miles of driving range based on the 250 mile EPA range rating. It did so in 40 minutes. So from 0 to 80%, the ID.4 added an average of 5 miles of driving range every minute of charging. And that's based on the EPA range rating of 250 miles per charge. But as I said before, I prefer to use my own personal highway range test as the measuring stick. If we do that, the ID.4 would need 4 more minutes of charging because it needs to be at 85% charge to add back 200 miles of driving range. The ID.4 holds more than 50 kilowatts of charge rate until 85% state of charge point when it drops down below 50 kilowatts. However, at 90% state of charge, it's still taking in 40 kilowatt. That's pretty good and much better than some competing EVs. Just ask Mach-E owners how they feel about charging over 80% on a DC fast charger. And at, let me see here, 1 hour exactly, we're at 97% state of charge. So basically, charges the entire car in an hour, but it actually finished up in 64 minutes. I thought it was interesting that the charging station never actually said 100%. It shut off and the vehicle was still showing 99% state of charge. In any event, we took in 83 kilowatt hour of energy. The ID.4 has an 82 kilowatt hour battery pack. It took us an hour and 5 minutes and cost a total of $27.43. That's including the $1.70 sales tax that the state of New Jersey charges.
Okay, so I'm back in the ID.4 now, and the charging station said it shut off at 99%, but the car is saying it is 100% charged. And that's kind of what I thought, because it was on 99% charged for a while before it shut off. We're showing a range of 274 miles, and the car definitely says it is 100% charged. So a little over an hour to fully charge an ID.4 from dead. That's pretty good considering it has a pretty large battery of 82 kilowatt hour. So I put together a couple of graphs for us to take a look and do a little deeper analyzing of the ID.4's charging curve and time to charge. So let's take a look at those now.
As soon as we plugged in the ID.4, it jumped up to 122 kilowatt. That's what we love to see. And it gradually crept up to a peak of 131 kilowatt at the 30% state of charge point. And that's when it begins this long, slow ramp down until about 80% charged, when it's pulling just under 70 kilowatts. It took 40 minutes to reach 80% state of charge, and the ID.4 had taken in 66 kilowatt hour at that point. Therefore, the average charge rate was 110 kilowatt between 0 and 80% state of charge. Now that's really important because I talk a lot about the average power draw, not the peak power draw. There are some electric vehicles that have very high peak power draws, but they only hold it for a short period of time, and then they have an aggressive ramp down, and their average power draw isn't that great. Averaging 110 kilowatts over the period of 0 to 80% state of charge is very good for an electric vehicle, and it's what makes the ID.4 one of the best charging electric vehicles available today. It's not the best, but considering the price of the ID.4, it's a kind of a value electric vehicle. It has very good DC fast charging capabilities compared to the other electric vehicles in its class. I mentioned earlier in the video that a couple of months ago, I did a 2 to 90% DC fast charge test with an ID.4, and I really wanted to capture 0 to 100%, which is why I repeated this test. I overlaid the data from the original DC fast charge test. You can see it in the dark blue. And the reason why I did that was just to see how similar the charging curve would be. And as you can see, it's extremely similar. That's what you like to see. You want to have your electric vehicle kind of repeat the same charging every time you plug in. Some EVs I've tested on multiple occasions seem to have a much greater degree of variation in the charging curve, but the ID.4 is remarkably similar time after time, and that's good because you know exactly what to expect when you're charging. Next up, let's take a look at the time to charge graph. Now, this is a graph that a lot of my followers ask me for, and I know quite a few people actually download these, print them out, and put them in their car because it really gives you a good idea of how long it's going to take you to charge your EV when you're on a road trip. Now, you'll notice, of course, I charge from 0 to 100%, but it shouldn't matter very much. Even if you plug in at 15% or 20%, the charging curve should remain relatively similar from that point on. So it might be a little different. There's things that can affect it, like weather, temperature, depending on if it's super cold out and the battery isn't warm, it's going to take a little bit longer to charge. But this graph here should give you a really good idea of about how long you should expect to stay at the DC fast charge station. If you take a look right out from the beginning, we get up to 23% charged in 10 minutes. That's really quick. Now, you're not going to repeat that if you plug in at, say, 25% state of charge, because the most aggressive and fastest charging happens at the lowest state of charge. But in 10 minutes, we added about 57 miles of range, and that's really good. Now, I spoke earlier about adding 100 miles of range, and that's one of the things that I always talk about, 100 miles of range and then 200 miles of range. Earlier on, I said that we reached the 40% state of charge point in 15 minutes, and I showed that graphic on the DC fast charge screen, and we did. However, the Electrify America charging station doesn't show seconds, and after reviewing my video, I noticed that it actually reached it in 15 minutes and 50 seconds. So on this graph, I changed it to 16 minutes because it was closer to 16 minutes. So you'll notice here we hit the 40% state of charge point in 16 minutes. And at that point, that's when we've added 100 miles of driving range if you're going to use the EPA rated 250 mile driving range on the ID.4. Now, as I mentioned earlier, my own personal 70 mile an hour highway range test delivered 234 miles on the ID.4. So if we use that, it takes 1 more minute and we cross the 100 miles added point at 17 minutes. Now, next up, let's take a look at 50% state of charge. It reaches 50% state of charge in 20 minutes. At that point, you've added somewhere between 115 and 125 miles of range. That's very good in my book. A 20-minute stop, add well over 100 miles of range on a road trip. That works, and that's, again, one of the reasons why I say this is a really good charging electric vehicle. Now let's jump up to the 200-mile range added point. And again, if we follow the EPA's guidance, that hits in 40 minutes. Follow my range test, and it takes 5 more minutes. And we crossed the 200-mile range added point in 45 minutes and at the 85% state of charge point. From there on, things slow down a bit, as they do with all electric vehicles, and it takes 20 more minutes to go from 85% state of charge to 100% state of charge. Again, we like to remind the followers that if you don't need to charge to 100%, if you don't need that added range, when you're on a DC fast charger, unplug at 80% and move on, because it charges really slowly after that point. Now, I just pointed out that it took 20 minutes to go from 85% to 100%. So waiting 20 minutes just to add 15% state of charge simply isn't worth it unless you absolutely need to do so.
So that's it for the ID.4 DC fast charge test and analysis. But before we go, I have a little video clip here that I recorded while I was recording the DC fast charge test with the ID.4, just to give you guys a little insight into what goes on while I'm doing these DC fast charge recordings. Thanks for watching, and please click that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any upcoming content here on State of Charge. So just a little behind the scenes reporting here. I don't think everybody realizes that every 60 seconds, the Electrify America screen times out, like you're just seeing there. When that happens, I have to press that button to reset the screen. Otherwise, I'll lose all the data for 60 seconds while the screen just says Electrify America, and we won't get a complete DC fast charge recording. So just to let you guys know, I don't just come here and hang out for like an hour or an hour and a half. I have to stand here and press that button every 60 seconds. So annoying. Electrify America, please change that. We don't need the screen to time out and just display Electrify America. Leave it on this screen all of the time. There's no need to just put your big Electrify America logo on there for 60 seconds. Okay, I've said my piece.